This is a minister's school, and as a school, there are many times that we might explore things that you might not preach from your pulpit. That doesn't mean you don't need to know them. That doesn't mean that you don't need to be educated in the things that are around you, the world that you live in, and all the things and teachings and doctrines, particularly, that are bombarding the people that you pastor. Now, I know not all of you pastor churches, but you may someday. But you'll be doing counseling, you'll be dealing with people, and the more you can know about what they're exposed to, the easier that it's going to make it for you to be able to help them along the way. And the subject that I'm going to deal with today is a controversial subject. You all have looked at my title, and I've had a lot of joking and comments about it. It's scriptural. You know that it is. Jesus told the Pharisees that you strain out a gnat, but you'll swallow a camel. And we know that he was talking about some things that they paid particular attention to, but they let some greater things go that they needed to be involved in and understand it. They were swallowing those things without knowing what they were doing. And so that's where my title come from, and obviously my intention was for you to be curious about it, but it's not really about camels, but you think about that, and it is going to be part of the idea that we'll have. But this lesson has been on my heart, and it's not been easy for me to prepare for this, although I could have probably preached it without studying it, because as I think it was Brother Binion said, you need to be ready instant in season and out of season. That means you need to be studied. And so these are some things that I have studied, but I have spent a lot of time in prayer, because the last thing that I want to do is to offend any one of my brethren. But there are times perhaps that we all need to take a look at some things that we believe, and why do we believe them? That's the real question. Do you know why you believe what you believe? And so with that in mind, the title of my lesson is, Did You Really Swallow That Camel? Now, like I said, I've had a lot of jokes and things about it. People commenting to me. Brother Curtis asked me if I was ready to come in and swallow that camel, and I said, well, I woke up with him this morning. No offense to my wife. I woke up with him this morning, and he's been on my back all day. And I can tell you that he swallowed me the last several months as I prepared for this. And my wife made a joke out of it. I'd disappear to my study, and she'd say, are you in there riding the camel again? And it's been a struggle, because I truly want this to be a lesson for you to think about and examine what you believe and why you believe it. My scripture reading is going to come, boy, I'm glad they made that clock bigger. It was real little to look to start with, and I thought, I'm glad to borrow Brother David's glasses to see it. But I can see it now. My reading, which is short, which really doesn't pertain to the lesson itself so much, but as a background, is in the book of Titus, in the first chapter, beginning about the 9th verse. Now, most of us know that Paul is writing to Titus, who is his son in the ministry. He was giving him instructions. He gives qualifications for the ministry, for those particularly who are going to pastor churches. But down about the 9th verse, about those who are going to pastor, to be elders, he says, holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able to by sound doctrine, both to exhort and to convince the gainsayer. Those are two different extremes. Exhorting those that are saved is one thing, and convincing the gainsayers is on another extreme. But guess what? Those gainsayers sometimes may be right among you. They might be the very ones that you're sent to pastor, who are struggling with something or misunderstanding something, and you need to be able to convince them of the right understanding. He goes on and says, for there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouth must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake, meaning that they do it for money. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Grecians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. And so Titus had a responsibility to know some things about what those Jewish gainsayers were going to teach. Later on, he says, avoiding Jewish fables. So he had a responsibility to know some of those things. And so today, with the Lord's help, we'll try to explore something. Remember, this is a school. We're going to explore. I can't preach like Brother Spurgeon. I tell you, it's difficult to come up here after such a wonderful message and to know that I'm going to bring your thoughts back more to some line upon line, precept upon precept things. But with the Lord's help, we'll do that, and our purpose is to bring honor and glory to Him no matter what that we do. We want that to be the most important thing that we do. But about 3 months ago, right after I was asked to think about bringing a lesson at the school, we were in a Bible study at Sulphur Fork Church, and previously we had made the decision as a church to study Bible characters. And I'd given them a list of about 50 Bible characters, and they went through, and I said, list your top 15. Just check off your top 15, and then I'll go through, and we'll figure out what order to take them in based on the most check marks on which one. And so we did that, and I believe it was the second one on the list was Antichrist. That was a name that was on the list, and so it come time for the Bible study, and we had, 25, 28, something like that there. Pretty good for a Sunday night Bible study for us. And so as we came in, I asked the question, who do you believe, or what do you believe about Antichrist? And after much discussion and back and forth, and some saying one thing and some saying another, they came to the general consensus that Antichrist was an individual that would appear at the end of time, just before that Christ returned to take out the saved people and leave behind the lost, before that they went through a tribulation period, at the end of which that he would set up an earthly kingdom. And I listened, and I said, so you don't really believe the 18th article of faith in the New Hampshire Confession that this church was established on 125 years ago? And that's when I got the deer in the headlights look, and nobody quite understood what I was saying. And so my question to me was, where did these people hear that? I know the 4 preachers that pastored at that church before that I was there. I know each one of them personally. They've all been to this school, and I'm confident that they didn't teach that from the pulpit. I'm pretty confident of that. Where did they get it? And how did they come about that? I've never preached on this subject from the pulpit in the 30-some years that I've been preaching. I've talked about it. I've had some Bible studies, but I've never preached about it. And so the question is, where did they get that doctrine? Maybe you all agree with that. Perhaps you do. Perhaps you didn't catch anything at all in it. My wife did. I can tell you that. She was the only one in the crowd that disagreed, but she's lived with me for 30-some years, and I've swallowed this camel, folks. I'm not telling you something that I haven't already been through. I've ate this camel lock, stock, and barrel, and it was painful for that camel to be extracted from me. Very painful. Brother Reynolds is sitting in the back, and he was part of the physician who helped extract that from me. Brother Darrell Hicks is long gone to be with the Lord. He was another one, and so I've been down this road. And so I wondered where they got this. And so that brought me up with the question, where did they get this doctrine? Is there anything fundamentally wrong with what I just told you? Is there anything fundamentally wrong with that idea, as I just told you, the consensus of what that they believe? And if there is something wrong, why don't we address it more often? If it really is something fundamentally wrong with it. And that's what we're going to try to explore today, if that clock will slow down, is to try to explore that. Well, the answer to the first question is where did they get this from? Well, they got it from every evangelistic preacher that's on the television. Every one of them. You go down to the bookstores, the Christian bookstore, they're filled with, the shelves are filled with it. I brought my good old Schofield Bible with me. This was the first Bible I ever owned. You get it from Schofield Bible. You'll get it from Charles Ryrie Study Bible. You'll get it from the Nelson Study Bible. You'll get it from the Tim LaHaye Prophecy Bible. Almost every study Bible, almost, not all of them, but almost every study Bible that you find out there that you send one of your sheep to study with, and they'll ask you, I've been asked 100 times, what study Bible should I use? Be prepared. If you give them a study Bible, they're going to read the notes. They're going to read the notes. And you know what? At the end of it, they're going to be an exact copy, unless you do something to intervene and help them, they're going to be an exact copy of whoever did the study notes on that Bible. And I know I grew up with Schofield Bible, and there's a lot of good things about some Schofield's note, but you got to beware. We'll talk a little bit about those. So they find them everywhere. Not only that, but they're inundated with the movies, the Christian-based movies, the Tim LaHaye series on Left Behind. Those are fiction, supposedly, but based on their theology and what they believe in. Our people are exposed to that everywhere they go. And whether you like it or not, they're going to hear that, and that's what they think. I know that the four preachers ahead of me didn't teach that from the pulpit, but yet that's what they believed because that's what they've been inundated with. And we need to find out whether or not that there is anything fundamentally wrong with that. I got to move on already. My objective is to identify and examine the primary interlocking elements of, listen to this, mainstream evangelical eschatology. The interlocking elements of mainstream evangelical eschatology. And they lock together. That's where the camel comes in, you see. He's got legs, and he's got a head, and he's got a tail, and when you get the outline, it's got a picture of a camel with all these little things on there. But see, you might think you're just going to take a little bite, that you're just going to get a little piece of it. But if you take that little piece, it's got a bunch of other stuff connected to it that you're going to have to swallow as well in order to believe that one little piece. So you're going to get a whole lot more than you bargained for if you start down that road. So that's our objective, is to examine those things. It is not my purpose to defend or give critical analysis of any eschatological system, but rather simply to expose the dangerous errors in some of them. And so that's my objective. If I get onto your system of eschatology, I don't want to belittle it. We've got brethren among us that believe all of these different things. All I ask each one of you is to honestly examine what you believe and be convinced in your heart that you're right and that it aligns with the Word of God. And that's what we're going to look at, is the Word of God. Now let me give you some definitions. First of all, is mainstream. That was part of our objective. Mainstream is defined as the popularly accepted trends, ideas, principles, and values that are held by the majority of the people. The majority of the people. Now, I said mainstream evangelical. We all hear the term evangelical. If you're watching politics at all now, you know that looking for the evangelical vote. They want the evangelical vote. Well, what is an evangelical? That they want their votes. And what part does this play in it? Are you an evangelical? Well, I looked it up. I knew what the definition was, but I looked it up. And the definition is a member of any of various Christian churches that believes in the sole authority and inerrant content of the Bible. I believe that. I believe in the sole authority and inerrant content of the Bible, a salvation only through regeneration or a new birth, and a spiritually transformed life. Isn't that what we believe? But I tell you what, that's what the Pentecostals believe, or at least say they believe. That's what all the Southern Baptists believe. That's what all of the other mainstream churches out there, except the Catholic Church, which is not considered to be evangelical because they hold the Catholic Church to be equal with the Scriptures. and that the Pope to be able to speak in terms of having authority from God. And so they don't come under the evangelical heading. Neither does some high church Episcopalian churches or some of those who hold to high church organization. But the rest of us are lumped in together as evangelicals, and so you're in that lump whether you want it or not. But I'm proud to be in that lump because that's what I believe. I believe that the Bible is inerrant. I believe you must have a born-again experience, and I believe that you must have a Holy Spirit-filled and led life. And so we're in that group, and that's the definition of it. And then, of course, the other part of that was eschatology. And that word means it's a branch of theology that is concerned with such things as death, the second coming of Christ, the last judgment, heaven and hell, all of those things that are in the future. So now you know what mainstream evangelical eschatology is. Let's find out how and what part that plays in our daily lives. And to do that, we've got to give you some more definitions. And, that might seem elementary, but it's amazing the number of people who really don't know what some of these definitions are. Let me give you the definition, first of all, of millennium, because that's what we're going to be talking about. We're talking about millennium. The word millennium is derived from two Latin words, mille meaning thousand and annum meaning year. Hence, the literal meaning is 1,000 years. And the term is found 6 times. It's found in the 20th chapter of Revelation, an admittedly very symbolic book, but that's the only place it's found. And so that has become the center point of eschatology. So you got, I believe, something about that 1,000 years that it talks about in the book of Revelation. The question is, what do you believe? And if you take the word millennium and you either add a pre or a post or an A at the beginning of it, that's pretty much going to define where you are. You're in one of those 3 camps. If you believe anything at all, you're in one of those 3 camps. Now, each one of those camps has a whole lot of little subdivisions in it, and we're not going to talk about that. I just want you to understand what the main camps are. And after I read these definitions, you can maybe decide where you are. The first one is postmillennialism. Generally speaking, postmillennialists affirm that the millennium is a period of 1,000 years of universal peace and righteousness in this world, which precedes the return of Christ to the earth in judgment. Postmillennialists are divided as to whether or not the period of time is a literal 1,000 years or whether it's spiritual, and they're divided on whether or not that it is still all future, or perhaps we already might be in it. If you read after B.H. Carroll very much, you'll find out that B.H. Carroll and many of our early Baptist preachers were postmillennialists. They saw an awakening taking place, and they interpreted that as being the widespread of the gospel, and the world was going to be tamed by that gospel and brought under the rule of Christ, and there would be peace throughout the world. So postmillennialists believe that there will be a period of peace preceding the coming of Christ, some literal, some think it's spiritual, but listen to this last part. Postmillennialists hold that when Christ returns, the general resurrection occurs, final judgment takes place for all men and women, and a new heaven and a new earth are established. That's a general judgment and a general resurrection. That's what they believe. That when Christ returns, that's it. That the world will end, that there will be a separation and a judgment that takes place. And so we're going to read the 18th article here in just a little bit. And so that's what postmillennialists believe. I can understand why that many of our forefathers and perhaps many of you today might be postmillennialists. That's okay. That's okay. I'm just giving you the definition about it. Premillennialism. Now, this is not my definition. I took this definition straight from one of the leading apostles of premillennialism, Charles Ryrie himself, who authored the Bible, the Ryrie Study Bible. He's still living. Premillennialists hold to a literal interpretation of the Scriptures. They believe that the promises made to Abraham and David were unconditional and have had or will have a literal fulfillment. In no sense have these promises been abrogated or fulfilled in the church, which is a distinct body in this age, having promises and a destiny different from Israel. At the close of this age, premillennialists believe that Christ will return for his church, meet her in the air, and then in parentheses, he's got this, I didn't put it here, he did. This is not the second coming of Christ. He wants us to understand that he believes that when Christ returns, that it's not the second coming because he's not touching earth, he's just coming in the air. And so he distinguishes that. He goes on and says, which event, called the rapture or the translation, will usher in a 7-year period of tribulation on earth. After this, the Lord will return to earth. This is the second coming of Christ to establish his kingdom on earth for 1,000 years, during which time the promises to Israel will be fulfilled literally. Now, that's his definition, not mine. And when I asked that question in our class about what do you believe about Antichrist, did you hear all of those contents that were in there? They were all in there. That's the common belief of evangelicals today, and that's what all of our people are being exposed to. And I tell you, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I'm going to tell you why as we get along. If that clock will just hold off a little bit. Amillennialism. Amillennialists take the word figuratively as meaning an indefinitely long period. The 1,000 years are therefore symbolic of the entire age between Christ's first coming and his second coming. Amillennialists insist that the promises made to national Israel, David, and Abraham in the Old Testament are fulfilled by Christ, and that his kingdom is spiritual, not literal. This age, which is often referred to as the church age or the times of the Gentile, is the entire period of time between the two advents of our Lord. Amillennialists believe that during this period, good and evil continue to grow together, with wickedness becoming worse and worse. Now listen to this last part. At the end of the indefinite period, Christ returns in judgment of all men. The general resurrection occurs. Final judgment takes place for all men and women. And a new heaven and a new earth are established. That's exactly the same as the postmillennialists say that they believe. The difference is that the postmillennialists believe that we're going to have an age of peace and harmony here on the earth, in which that there will be no, I don't want to say sin, but they don't believe that there's going to be any violence, any uprising, that there's going to be peace among all humanity. I can't believe that as long that as Christ has not destroyed sin, it's still going to be here. But that's my opinion. But you'll notice that together, that's what separates the two. The amillennialists aren't looking for an earthly kingdom. We're looking for a return of Christ, and that his kingdom is spiritual and that it's here today. I've got to move. Article 18 of the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. We believe that the end of the world is approaching, that at the last day Christ will descend from heaven and raise the dead from the grave to final retribution. A solemn separation will then take place, that the wicked will be judged by endless punishment and the righteous to endless joy, and that at this judgment will fix forever the final state of men in heaven or hell on principles of righteousness. That's what I believe. That is what I believe. That's what the 18th article of faith says of the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. And I believe it not because that 18th article says that, but because that's what I believe the Scriptures teach. But I didn't always believe that. Let me give you one more quote. This is from a study on the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verse 3, by W.T. Russell at the West End Missionary Baptist Church, tape 13. In this verse, some people seem to believe in the millennial. I do not believe in the teaching of the postmillennialist or the premillennialist view. You'd have to call me an amillennialist, because I don't believe there is a literal reign of Christ on earth with his saints. If I couldn't prove that, I'd be afraid to make this comment. Now, I just did that because if I was the only one who believed that, I at least wanted to call Brother Russell up, because I know he believed that too, because I've listened to that, and he's a witness to it. I've listened to his tapes. And so he said he was an amillennialist, and he said why. And if you'll listen to all those tapes, you'll understand more about it. So now we come to the camel in the room. Not an elephant, but a camel in the room. And that is that all future events center on national Israel. That is the camel that's in the room. That's the camel that you want to be careful that you don't swallow. You don't want to be careful of that. It's got all kinds of things attached to it. But that's the body of it, is that all future events, world events, center on national Israel. Now, in 1947, when the UN resolution supporting the partitioning of Palestine came out of the UN, at that time, that's what provided the groundwork for the 1948 Arab-Israeli war, through which that Israel spread out, claimed more land, and established a state of Israel and declared their borders actually as with not definite borders. But what I really want you to understand about that is that it was not popular at that time to establish a Palestinian partition. As a matter of fact, all of the advisors, President Truman at that time, advised against it. They said there's going to be nothing but trouble. It's just going to cause more war and conflict. And they advised him not to do it. But 1947 was an election year. And he wanted the evangelical support. And so, as he began to listen to the evangelicals who had the loudest voices, because they was the only ones that could afford radio programs back then, or TV programs, or whatever was on, and they had the loudest voices, and because that Truman wanted to hear, wanted the evangelical vote, he caved and supported the UN resolution that established the partitioning of Palestine, which led to the establishment of the State of Israel. And so evangelicals did that because they believe that it was necessary for Israel to own that land in order for God's future to be fulfilled. And so they were trying to help God out, somewhat like Abraham and Sarah did when Isaac was born. They wanted to help him out. God doesn't need our help. And so they misunderstood all this, and because of their misunderstanding, they applied political pressure, which put the world in the condition that it's in today, and I don't think it was ever God's plan. I know it wasn't God's plan in order to have unfulfilled literal promises to Israel. He's fulfilled them all. I'm not going to have time. Okay, now here's a poll. Here's a poll that was taken in November of last year. It's fresh. It's not old data. It's new. And it was taken by the Center for Mideastern Policy at the Brookings Institute, which is a very reliable institute, think tank. And in this poll, and you can go out online and look it up, and in this poll, there was one section titled American Attitudes Toward the Middle East and Israel. American attitudes toward the Middle East and Israel. Overall, evangelicals tended to express a more pro-Israel stance than non-evangelical Christians, with many relating the current ongoing conflict to their religious beliefs. Some like to say that what's going on over there is not a religious war. It is a religious war. The Muslims know that it's a religious war. And the evangelicals say that it's a religious war. They know it is because they want to see Israel get their land back, because they believe that God has unconditional promises to them. And so it's being motivated by those evangelicals who are trying to promote Israel to expand their territory and to rebuild a temple, which I may get to and I may not. Among Christians, 75% of evangelicals say that things need to happen in Israel before Christ returns. More specifically, they say that for the rapture or second coming to occur, it is essential for current day Israel to include all the land they believe was promised to biblical Israel in the Old Testament. That's what they believe, and that's what they're pushing for. That's what the laws are being motivated about, many of those things, because it's being pushed by the evangelicals who believe Israel must have a nation so that God can continue His blessings. 73% of evangelicals say that the world events, need to happen in Israel before Christ returns. More specifically, they say that for the rapture, I read that one. That's one of the next one. 73% of evangelicals say that the world events would turn against Israel the closer we get to the rapture or the end times. 79% of evangelicals say that the unfolding violence across the Middle East is a sign that the end time is near. Now, I believe the end time is near, but not because of the violence in the Middle East specifically, but because of the morality of this world and the other things that are really God's concern. So, yes, I believe the end time may be near, but whether it's not, I don't know. But I know that I feel from my having this camel extracted from me that it's not centered around Israel. I got to move on. Okay. Can you guys stop that clock? The main thing, this is what I call the straw that broke the camel's back. For me, this is for me, maybe not for you, but for me. And that is, and I read it, that where did this 7-year tribulation come from? Where in the world does it tell us in the Bible that there's going to be 7 years of tribulation in a time frame out there? That's critical. That's critical for me, having swallowed this camel as I grew up and being taught. And I can tell you that by the time I was 15 years old, I could tell you everything that was going to happen, all the end time prophecies, who was going to do what, and everything. I consumed that book. And my dad was a premillennialist. And so I grew up on it. I hadn't heard of anything else. But when I come to an understanding that everything depended on this 7-year tribulation period, my world began to come apart. Let's examine that in a few minutes that we have. The 7-year tribulation period. Daniel 9:24 to 27. You know what's happening in the 9th chapter of Daniel? Daniel has been in captivity for almost 70 years. He realizes that the end of their captivity is nearly finished because Jeremiah the prophet, who was a contemporary with Daniel before he was taken off into Babylon, he went back and read Jeremiah's prophecies, and he saw that Jeremiah had prophesied that they would be in captivity for 70 years, 1 year for each year that the land did not receive its jubilee or it's a year of Sabbath, and so it added up to 70 years. So Daniel recognized from the prophecy that it was about over. And so he goes before God in an humble prayer and asks God, what is going to happen to Jerusalem, thy holy city, and to the temple and to thy people? What's going to happen to them, realizing that this prophecy was there? And so he waits, and the angel comes to him, and here's what the angel says. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sin, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the Most High. He says that it's going to be 70 weeks before those 6 things can be accomplished, and we'll come back to those 6 things, but he says specifically there's a time frame that's going to govern when this is going to happen, and that verse is critical here in just a moment. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Verse 27, listen closely to this verse. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifices and the oblations to cease, and for the overspreading of abomination he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Now, contained within those 4 verses right there, is the whole nucleus and the center of everything, nearly everything, that those who believe there's going to be a 7-year tribulation, it all comes from these verses right here. It all comes from right here because Daniel divides this out into 3 different time periods. And it has to do with events more than it has to do with time, but it certainly has to do with time, 70 weeks. Now, the 70 weeks are weeks of years. And the total prophecy spans 490 years. 7 times 7 is 49, I remember that from school. And you add a 0 on, so you got 490 years. So that's pretty simple. It is broken down into 3 segments, which represent major events. Now, if you want a better understanding of how these timelines are calculated and from what point, I would recommend B.H. Carroll's interpretation of the English Bible. Read his 3 chapters that he's got on Daniel 9, chapter 9, and it will help you to understand how these are calculated, and that may be a starting point for you. It was for me. Okay, so the three periods are, first of all, 7 weeks, 49 years to the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And so that's one time period. And then he says from the going forth and the rebuilding of the wall, there'll be another 62 weeks. That's the second time period. That's 434 years. From the rebuilding of Jerusalem to what? To the coming of Messiah. He said that 69 weeks after are determined, 70 weeks are determined, and as he breaks it down, after the 69th week is the coming of Messiah. And then there's just 1 week left over, because he says it's going to be 70 weeks, and the 1 week that's left over is how many years? It's to be 7 years, because there's 7 days in a week, and each day represented a year. So there's 7 years. That sound like a strange, same number you heard before, something about 7 years? Let's find out what it says. It talks about that 7 years. Now, in that 7 years is determined for the confirming of the covenant. Remember what I read? That he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 year. So one year, 7 years, is determined for the confirming of the covenant and completing all 6 events from the first verse, which was to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. You look up that word holy, and you'll find out it's not talking about a person, but it's reference, and I don't know much about Aramaic, but it's referencing a place, not a person. And so it's the anointing of the most holy place. Who lived in the most holy place? God lived in the most holy place. And so he's lining up something that's going to take place here, an anointing that's going to take place. Now, it's noteworthy, I think for me, and I'm just kind of a numbers guy, that it was 490 years from the time that they first came into Canaan until King Saul was established, and the kingship started. It was another 490 years from Saul up to the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, which it tells us in the first chapter of Daniel in the first verse, was the year that Daniel was taken into captivity, and the kingship, the sovereignty actually ceased then, because then they were under the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar. So it's noteworthy that it was 490 years up to there, and then they were to go into captivity for 70 years, because that they had not given the land its Sabbath, and then there was another 490 years until the real king was to come, the one who would complete the covenant, the one who would make an end of sin, the one who would make transgressions cease, and the one who would anoint the most holy. So that's all described as being 490 years in the future. Now, that clock has not stopped. It just keeps ticking. And so this 7, that's important, by the way, here in a minute. It's important for us to understand that 7th week, those 7 years, that's where that 7-year tribulation come from. Now, it took us 69 weeks to get all the way up to Messiah, and the way my time works, the 70th week would come after the 69th. But those who believe in a 7-year tribulation believe that, God stopped time. He stopped time, and it's not counting anymore, because Israel was taken into Israel was out of the land, and they rejected their Messiah, and therefore, because they rejected their Messiah, God stopped time until somewhere down the road that there would be a change, and then He would start counting time again. Now, that's not Danny Chandler. Let me read you a couple things. The premillennial theory holds that prophetic time is not counted when Israel is out of the land or when Israel is in apostasy. Hence, we have the view that the kingdom prophecies are not being fulfilled during the church age when Israel is either out of the land or in apostasy, and that the church is only an interlude between a Jewish kingdom of the past and a Jewish kingdom of the future. And so it holds that everything that's going on now is happening as an afterthought. That it's really something that God would have finished to start with, but because Israel rejected their Messiah, He stopped time, and He's not going to start it again until somewhere out in the future. Okay, The first advent of Christ, according to this teaching, brought Israel up to the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy. With the second advent, that is the rapture, prophetic time again will begin to run, and the 7 years of the Great Tribulation will complete the 70th week. That in turn will be followed by the establishment of the millennial kingdom on earth. That's what they hold. So this magic 7 years somewhere comes out of this 490 that Daniel had prophesied before the Messiah would come. I don't hold to that. I believe that Jesus came when He said He would come, and He did what He said He would do, and He completed that covenant. He confirmed that covenant with many for 3.5 years, and we know His ministry was 3.5 years, and He confirmed that covenant with many, and He was cut off in the middle of that 3.5 weeks. And what had happened for the next 3.5 weeks? We find out that the most holy place was anointed there on the day of Pentecost as the Holy Spirit came down and filled them, and God was present there in them, and that holy dwelling place called the church was witnessed and testified, and the apostles went everywhere preaching and confirming the covenant with the Jews for those next 3.5 years. Why do we need a 7 years out in the future? You be careful what you believe about the future, because you're going to rob Christ of His glory if you're not careful. You'll rob Him of His glory, because those who believe in a future event, they take that last verse that I read, and He that shall confirm the covenant with many, they give that verse to Antichrist. They say that that's Antichrist. If you think that I'm wrong, you look up Mr. Schofield, you look up Mr. Ryrie, you look up Mr. Nelson, you look up all the premillennialists, and you see what they say about Antichrist and who he is, and every one of them will take you back to this 27th verse of the book of Daniel, and they'll say that he that confirms the covenant is the Antichrist that is coming in the future. He will confirm the covenant with Israel, and during the time that he confirms the covenant with Israel for 3.5 weeks, that they will rebuild their temple, and when they rebuild their temple, I'm just hurrying for the time's sake, you'll get more of this in the outline when you see it, that they'll rebuild that temple, and when they rebuild that temple, they'll restart the animal sacrifices, and God will be happy somehow with that. How could that possibly be? How could God ever be happy with animal sacrifices being offered again before Him? Folks, I believe that that's the reason that Jerusalem was destroyed to start with. Because the thing that it says in the rest of this verse is that Jerusalem shall be destroyed because of the overspreading of abomination. And because of that He shall make it desolate. When Jesus came out of the temple that day, it tells us over in the 24th chapter of Matthew, and they asked Him, what's going to happen to this temple and to this city? And He said that there's not going to be one stone left upon another, that this temple is going to be destroyed. And He said that when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, know that it's nigh. He was talking about the destruction of that temple, and if you ask those who believe in a future 7-year tribulation period, they will tell you that the abomination of desolation that Jesus spoke of was Antichrist, somewhere out in the future. But Antichrist, this is in the notes again, Antichrist was not a person. Antichrist was sacrilege and abomination before God. Can there be any more abomination before God than after Jesus died on the cross and God ripped that veil of that temple in twain from top to bottom and exposed all that and said, no more, no more? And they took and they obviously sewed that veil back up, and it tells us over in the book of Hebrews that Paul says they stand daily ministering and offering animal sacrifices that can never take away sin. So we know that they continue to do that, and while at the same time rejecting the Son of God, and they offer these animal sacrifices. Is there anything that could be any more stinking rotten to God than that they've rejected His Son and think that those animal sacrifices could take away their sins or cover them up? That's the reason that the temple was destroyed. That's the reason that the city of Jerusalem was dispersed. The same thing happened to them that happened to the Amorites when that God promised the land to Abraham. He said, I cannot give it to you until the iniquity of the Amorites is full. full. And when it was full, he drove them out of the land because of the abomination that was there. And likewise, the Jewish nation, he gave them time and time and time again. And when he brought them in the land and Moses stood before them, he said, if you will, then God will. If you'll serve him, then he'll bless you. But if you turn away from him, then he will destroy you. He will drive you out into the world, and he will make this place a place of dust, and there'll be nothing left. And just as I read in Daniel, it says that to finish the transgression. What transgression? The transgression of Israel in the completion of their rejection of him and their abomination, and they were driven out of the land. God didn't need that land. He didn't need that temple. He didn't need any of that because his Son came down. He was God. He is God. They don't need that. And for evangelicals to think that somewhere out in the future God's going to revert back to that picture rather than the reality, I'm sorry, it's just foolishness. It's foolishness. And don't be a part of that. Understand what you believe and why you believe it. And understand that the poor people in your congregation that have been entrusted to you for you to lead and guide them, that the devil is stealing the glory of Jesus Christ and giving it to Antichrist and saying that he's going to do all these things out in the future when Jesus has already done them. He's already completed them. And that's what the Bible teaches, and my time's up, but I got to get to one last thing. I need one more witness. I need one more witness. All of this is in the notes. I hope you'll read it. I wanted to get to the camel. I only got to one leg, I think. But I'll tell you what, he goes down pretty well, even with one leg. People who sell camels for the swallowing, they know pretty well how to grease them up so that you can get them all down with one swallow. And I've had him down there, but I said that the straw or the camel in the room was the national Israel. And so all of these evangelicals believe that Christ will physically reign over natural Israel in an earthly kingdom. That's what they're looking for, earthly, carnal things. That's what the Jews missed to start with. When Jesus came, they thought that it was going to be an earthly kingdom. I ain't going to go over near as far as Brother Tim did, but I am going to go over a little bit. And so that's where their thinking is. But I want to bring one more witness into this, and I want to read you a conclusion. And I'm going to end with this. What about the future of the Jews? Will the temple be rebuilt and the ceremonial laws and the worship be reestablished along with their feasts and holy days? No. Big no. Those things were types and shadows until the real thing should come. Jesus did come, and there is no purpose to be accomplished in observing them now. When Jesus died, the middle wall of partition that separated Israel from the other nations came down, and God is no more obligated to the state of Israel today than He is to any other nation in the world, and that's by a sound Baptist by the name of Billy Moran. In the Israel of God, page 4, Old Union Missionary Baptist School, 1986. I would recommend that you go listen to that lesson and then re-listen to this one. I appreciate your time. Please look at the notes and study this out for yourself. Don't swallow it just because I said it was wrong or just because somebody else says it's right. You search the Scriptures and you let the Lord help you, and I'm pretty sure you're going to end up where I am. I appreciate your attention.